Well, I want to welcome everybody back to another episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamone, and I'm an acceptance coach who helps people heal from grief, loss, and trauma to discover their self-acceptance and step into their personal power. This podcast is your dedicated space for healing, growth, and transformation. Each episode shares insightful and inspirational stories along with practical tools and actionable insights that can help guide you along your healing journey. Today, I have an awesome guest with us. Her name is Emily Mantranach, and she became certified to teach yoga in 2017 and has continued her journey into multiple types of yoga. She became a certified wellness counselor through Ayurveda, which is a sister science to yoga. And in 2022, she officially became a life coach 2 years after that in 2024. She has a brain of an engineer to solve problems and the heart of a yogi living her best life as a self-actualist. An active and full-hearted individual, Emily wants to live life fully and bring peace into the world. Emily, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be here. It's exciting to be able to share a little bit more about the yoga, Ayurveda, and coaching.
I'm very excited because you shared a lot of details about that on our initial podcast interview. And Ayurveda is something that I don't know much about personally, and I know a lot of other people have questions about that. So I wanted to give you some space to talk about that and tell us what that is, and even a little bit more about yourself and your journey you've had.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll start a little bit with how did I get into yoga? I was actually in college. I thought, let me try something new. I went and I fell in love. So I went back more routinely. I started practicing on my own, and it really grew into this part of my life that was always there. Once I started learning more about yoga, I realized that it's more than just the space on the mat or the meditation on the mat, the breath work on the mat. There's actually ethics and morals that are followed. And then there's this piece of connecting to our greater self. That's part of the eight limbs. But beyond that, when we look into the sister science of yoga, Ayurveda, we actually look at what do we digest? And initially, that might sound like what do we eat? What do we drink? Those types of things. But it's everything. And so that gets us into emotionally, how are we doing? What are we listening to? What are we watching? Thanks for being here and listening to this, by the way. Um, Hopefully it's uplifting. But through all of those things, being able to understand how that affects the body, because we know how it feels to get into a crowded space where maybe our energy starts to feel a little bit small or shrinks because we can't feel fully ourselves. Maybe we feel like we can be fully ourselves, but when we're in an open room, it's harder to be like that with one other person. And so this is where it becomes into that individual aspect and where it gets really interesting. Now, relating to grief, we can feel grief a lot of times in Ayurveda, which, um, if you're familiar with Chinese medicine or other things, the meridians, you can tie it in a little bit too. But grief, we actually feel it in our heart space or pericardium. And so when we get into that space, we can figure out ways to process that. And by processing that, partially it's identifying, right? Like, man, I'm either going through the 5 or 7 steps, depending on whether you follow the Kubler-Ross or other methods for processing grief. But there's also things like maybe if I digest or eat this type of food, it'll help me release and keep my heart healthy during this space and this time. Or, and the lungs sometimes carry a little bit if they get more liquid into them. And how do I get that liquid out and keep the body from becoming stagnant? Because in grief, it can be overwhelming. And for me, it's been various forms. It's been, the loss of grandparents. One of my first memories of life is actually one of my grandparents passing when I was like 3 years old. And I remember the
Oh, wow.
tears. And so, yeah, so it's been part of my journey. And that doesn't have to be like the standing big event, right? Sometimes we can have big events for grief. We can also have small ones. And those are important too because they're telling us something. So I had as a smaller example, I had friends reach out and say, "Hey, I got together with this other friend down in Texas and we talked about you. We remember how fun it was when we were all together back in college." And I just had this moment of tears welling up, right? And it wasn't like they said anything bad. They didn't talk about me in like a poor manner. It was more of they were like, we missed that time. And that means something too. So it's important to recognize that grief can be small, but it can also be those big moments too. And through all of this, I do host and help people with like a grief retreat and how to process it through movement, what we digest, as well as other forms of letting go, forgiveness, things like that. But the biggest thing I've learned is whatever we're grieving is a sign of how much we loved and cared for what it was and what that experience was. And that's so big. For me, that was a mental change that helped me process through all of those emotions or anytime that something came up because I was like, oh, it may not feel good at the moment, but there was a time and there are good things in the experience that I can recall and come back to.
That's really powerful. I love that you brought up that grief doesn't always have to be something big, but it can be something small as well. And looking back on a small memory like that, like you brought up about your friends in college and having a good time with them, grief can be missing something small like that. It doesn't always have to be related around death. And it also, by the way, I was writing notes as you were talking. I love that you said too that grief is very heart centered. It's not conscious mind. It's very heart focused. And I think that's a lot of challenges we have in the grief space is we always want to try to consciously work through grief. We want to consciously say we can let go or get over it or move on, but it doesn't work that way when it's a heart-centered focused event. And that's something that takes a whole different approach and a whole different modality to work through that grief to learn how to move forward with it.
Yeah, definitely. Because our heart, we talk about the heart and the mind, and are they connected? Are they disconnected? Which one's in charge at this time or that time? But ultimately, they work together, and we get good thoughts from our brain too. So it's not a bad thing. But when we tap into the heart and we truly feel it, that's what starts to come up through some of the yoga classes if you've ever felt something. And even the idea of the issue is in the tissue, right? So if we are having stagnant emotions or things when we're stretching, those thoughts that are coming up are being released from the fascia and the muscle. And so we might have things come up that we need to process. In traditional yoga, typically they practice even with an empty stomach, partially because then we know the energy of the movement isn't going to the digestion of the food, but it's actually going to the digestion of everything that we want to process emotionally, mentally, physically, if, we've got something going on in the body or even spiritually, so we can reconnect to our purpose. And so it's really cool that you enjoy that heart presence too. It's so important.
Well, I think I did a Tony Robbins event back in 2020, and we did a deep meditation at the end of UPW with his wife, Robin. And I've never really done lots of meditation because I got ADD and I have a hard time sitting still as a person. But in this meditation, it was very intense for me because I got to this very calm, quiet place, and I can rarely get there on my own. But one of the things Tony had us do was put our hands over our heart during this meditation. And you could literally feel your heart just pumping. And it wasn't like a fast heart racing thing, it was just a slow kind of pump. And what was interesting about that is you felt this connection across your body. And I have a hard time putting it in words, but you feel like you're a whole different being in that state, in that space, because a lot of times in life, we're racing when we get out of bed in the morning to go get breakfast, get our kids ready to go to school. Then we're jumping in the car. Then we're sitting in traffic and we're pissed off sitting in traffic. Then we go to a job we don't like. And all these things happen in such a chaos calamity throughout the day. And then we go home and distract ourselves with TV or whatever the heck we do. And to your point, back to digestion of things, digestion isn't always food. It's what we take in through our sight, through our smell, through our hearing, our awareness of things in life. And so we're always taking and consuming things. And that's something that I think as you go through a healing process in grief, you start eliminating things that are not serving you, not having intention and purpose for you. So going back to that place of when you're in a deep meditative state like that from the heart, and you really feel your heart go, there's so many things that just you let go of. They don't matter anymore because you find out the core of life of where you really are.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a core practice of Ayurveda to check in with the heart rate. We can do that. It is, yeah. And it's a Tibetan practice to hold your hands over the heart because you're honoring that space. Sometimes it can be protective, depending on whether you put your left hand or your right hand first. There's a whole theory about receiving and giving in the body. Um, but when we connect in with the heart, whether it's, through feeling it on your neck or your pulse and other places, maybe listening to it, we actually pause and we can hear that space of, what's really coming up rather than what do I have to do next or what's next on my to-do list or gosh, this feels like a lot of stuff today or okay, next thing, just like you were saying, we just go, 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 go. That's when we actually can hear the heart. So it's great that you practice that through Tony Robbins' meditation. And the sitting, being still is one of the ways to do that. But another way I'll encourage people to do is just check in with your heart once in a while. It's okay to do that, even if you're not, if you can just feel it. We're alive, right? And it gives you that reminder of how important that is. And that can be really important too when we're going through grief because we can get caught up in the emotions of the loss. And if we can come back to that of, I'm here and I'm here for a purpose, we can also feel, okay, I'm still here and I have something to contribute and create in this world. And there's a good reason, no matter what the loss was. So it's a
I
good
think
thing for
that's
that too.
I think that's really powerful because grief, a lot of people identify with their emotions when they go through grief. And that's a big lesson I had to learn the hard way. But when we say as we go through grief that I am angry or I am sad or I am lost or I am frustrated, you put that energy again into consumption. You put that energy into your body of identifying with those emotions. When in reality, we're not to jump on the spiritual side too much here, but we're souls having a human experience on this planet, and we're not our emotions. We're not. We're emotions are messages from what I teach people. They're messages trying to communicate something. And that can be, by the way, a lesson that we might need to learn, or it might be a reality check of how we feel. So I try to encourage people to use phrases like "I feel this way," or "It sounds like this," or "Looks like this." So that we can become an observer of life, because I think that's also coming back to that heart meditation that you're talking about. When we're just observing, we detach ourselves from those things and we actually allow ourselves the space to just process what is happening in front of us and not trying to interpretate it or manipulate it into something that we want it to be, but just acceptance of right here and now, this is what is, not what we think it is. And that's a beautiful place, by the way, of a non-judgmental space that can give us the ability to process our grief in a healthy way.
Yes, definitely. I love that because, and don't worry on the spiritual, at least from my perspective. Hopefully the audience doesn't mind either. But when we do that and we observe, we live from that, we respond rather than react,
Mhm.
or we at least take that pause, which is so important because, right, we have all of these thoughts coming up, and whether they're true or not is what we get to decide, but they create a feeling. And if that feeling leads us to take some action, we react rather than respond. Sometimes that action may not create the result that we want. And so if we take that time to really feel it and understand, then that feeling doesn't have to be a fact either, right? Like this may be this moment that I'm feeling like this, but it doesn't have to be all the time or forever. And if we can recognize that, then the response can be much more calm, or at least in a way that's going to help us get a result that might be helpful. Because when we're angry, we sometimes do silly things, or, that maybe we're like, oh, and then we have a new feeling and it can cascade into all of these things rather than having the feeling and saying, okay, now I feel this way. What am I going to do with this? What do I want to do? And what would be the right way that's compassionate for me and the other people that it might affect? Because we're all in this together. And when we connect, I'm going to go into the spirit a little bit more. When we connect to that greater consciousness of energy that we're all created from, whether it was a seashell made out of earth, air, wind, fire, space, or whether it was me made out of earth, air, wind, fire, space, right? We're all that energy. And so the cells, the consciousness, that all connects. And that's just to add a little bit to that. That's sometimes why it seems like maybe someone else is reading your mind or something like that, because we tap into that idea that we are connected beyond this experience right in front of us. Or somebody might call you because you were thinking about them, or vice versa. They were call you call them, and they were like, "Oh, I was just thinking about you." That's kind of how some of the little signs of how some of that's working too.
It's really powerful that you say that because I do believe in a lot of ways we are interconnected in more ways than I can imagine. And I've had experiences on my own grief journey where I've run into complete strangers that I don't even know. I don't know them from Adam. I literally just saw them. And I've had deep worldly conversations with them in the first 5 minutes of talking to them. And what's weird about it is that they'll bring up something that I'm dealing with that I haven't communicated yet, and it'll show it to me, and I'll sit there and go, "Whoa, what is happening right now?" But I've seen that as that collectively as a conscious, we are all connected with our because energy doesn't get destroyed; it just transmutes itself into something different. And so, um, when you think about back to something you talked about with reacting versus responding, there's a lot of times because we live in a very I call it the urgency culture is what we're living in right now, because everybody's just boom, 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 boom. We're just like ping ponging across different things, different tasks. We're reactive, very, very reactive. And so it takes a lot of work, by the way, to move from reaction to responding because you've got to give yourself permission and give yourself space to just exist and feel. Kind of like Emily talked about with the heart meditation, giving yourself permission to just be still. You don't need to be worried about 20,000 things going on right now or what you got to do in the next 10 minutes, but being present fully and just learning how to respond. And that gives you so much power back in your life. And that's why I think as we navigate grief journeys in particular, we do experience an array of emotions. And it comes when we don't want it to, by the way, because again, it's a heart focused problem. It's not a mindset. It's a heart problem. And so it's going to come in waves. It's going to come big and small. It's going to throw a lot at you. But when you step into that place of observership and say, I see you, I understand you, I acknowledge you, I accept you. And instead of reacting and going, wow, I shouldn't be this way today. I should be over this by now. When you give it that space, that's where the growth happens. And that's where grief doesn't have to be a negative heavy weight in your life. It can be the thing that moves you forward. It's gonna be the thing that transforms you into your alignment of who you need to be.
Yeah. And it's beautiful. Oh my gosh. We're getting into some things that are like really neat. So when we get into talking about spirit and our purpose and all of that, but plus the alignment you were bringing up too around meeting other people and being like, oh, wow. And we help each other through that, right? Like when we're learning about others, we can see it from a different perspective, and we can see like what that person's going through, the compassion that we have for them, and know that other people have that for us when we bring it up and we're vulnerable with them. but we can also see ways that, oh, maybe I can try this new way to do something that might help me process a little bit better the grief too. And this is one example, the podcast itself, right? Understanding that we all have these experiences in life, and what do we do with them, and how to help each other through it, which is a great way too. Once we get to that point of responding, we actually create a bigger connection to our greater selves. And that's beneficial in the way because we can feel more at home. If you think about the heart as
Mm.
our home, of course, we have home, the place we live, and we do want to feel at home in certain situations or with certain people. Maybe we feel it. But when we can feel that peace, that sense of home, then we know that there's some other further alignment with the greater experience of why we're here, right? And at least to me, okay, in a way, yes, it can feel a bit daunting to be like, whoa, okay, now I gotta go do this. But it can also feel good to be like, I'm on the right path and I'm able to do this. I'm fully capable beyond what I thought I was to work through and get through, be part of these experiences, help others along the way, and do that. Does that resonate with you as well, Chris?
That does, Emily, and you said that really well because you were reminding me of a clip from the movie Up in the Air with George Clooney back probably 20 years ago from now. But he had a job where he was actually having to go into corporations and fire people. And there's this clip in the movie where this guy's getting fired, and he's just like really angry and upset. He's just really pissed off, and he's like, "I've given up 20 years of my life here. Like, why are you doing this to me?" And then he brings up and says, "You went to school to be a chef." And you spent a lot of time working in culinary arts. And he was like, yeah, so. And he said, you had a passion for that. You had a deep passion for that. I saw that in your resume. You thrived in food culture. You thrived over here. This is your big passion. And the guy paused for a second and was like, whoa, yeah, I forgot about that. And he kept reminding him that you allowed somebody to take 20 years of your life and pay you to give up on your dream. This is just a chance to go do that dream again. And it's such a powerful clip in a movie of exactly what you're talking about going into our alignment and feeling like we're home. Because I do believe there's people on the planet, and I'll just say, like, you and me, for example, you talk about grief from this aspect of Ayurveda and yogi because it's your journey on this planet. It's your path, and you feel at home in that space. And I love that about you. Um, I'm over here in the grief space because of all the stuff I've gone through, losing a child and watching my grandfather die. All these things that I've gone through led me on this journey. But together, though, we are able to talk about the same thing and help people with the same topic from different aspects of our life where we feel at home and into our alignment. And that's what I think is so beautiful about this grief journey that we all go on because it takes us to places where we step into our alignment. And in my coaching, I call it stepping into your personal power, where we're not trading our time and our energy and our space for some cause that's not even our own, but we step into, like you said, closer to our own power and our own home. And when we're in that place, by the way, that alignment allows us to respond. And that response, by the way, it comes from a very deep place of gratitude and appreciation and contribution. And that's where life is built and life thrives, is right in that area.
Yeah, yeah, and it feels good. It feels really good. When you're working with people, if you don't mind me asking, how do you share with them that they know they're there?
So during my coaching sessions, I'm glad you asked that question because this came up twice this week. I've been helping people find their voice. And the way that I do it, by the way, is I ask them questions, but I let them talk 90% of the time. And I only talk and interrupt them when their voice comes out. That's the only time I interrupt somebody. And the way that I phrase it with them is the following. I say, did you just hear yourself? And a lot of times they go, well, what do you mean? They kind of have this like ghost look on their face. And I say, that was the real you that just came out. Did you hear how you talked about yourself? And sometimes I have to prompt them by reading back to them what they said and how they said it. And what's really powerful is if I do that 3 or 4 times in a coaching call, somebody catches it. It's really funny. It's they don't fully recognize it, but I see it all the time. And it's a powerful thing to watch these people find their voice and step into their power, because they go from this place of saying things like, "Well, I don't know how I feel. Well, I kind of guess this." Well, maybe that, but this. And then when their full voice comes out, it's always after that. And their actual how they feel comes after that. And so it's been a blessing to show people that. And when they get really uncomfortable at first, because I always say in grief that I'm sure you get this way when you have somebody new to yoga, by the way, because I felt that way when I first tried yoga. I was like, what is this thing? Like, what are we doing? But when you get into that and you experience it for yourself and you give yourself that permission and space, it's like meeting a whole new version of yourself, and it doesn't feel awkward at that point either. It feels comfortable, just like you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And so when I do the coaching and take it beyond yoga and we talk about that self-actualization, it's very similar. So we talk about like, where do you feel the light and how do you feel that in you? Because then that's exactly what you're talking about. The voice comes out and says, okay, from a grief perspective, these things have happened, but that doesn't have to stop me from all these other experiences. So honoring those things, right? Because sometimes they open up a part of us that we didn't know existed or a benefit that we didn't know existed that could be created in the world for others to help them open up and see those things as well, which is super cool. But then once we see that purpose, like the aura, which goes out a number of feet from the body, and this is why we can feel each other. Sometimes we can feel each other even though we're not in the same room. Sometimes we can feel each other like you can feel somebody's body heat as a brief example when you're not like touching them. So our aura goes out, and if it's in the same space or in the same type of house or building, we can feel that. And our nervous system actually starts to regulate. So when we're in these
Mm.
moments of like feeling fully ourselves, a lot of times you'll see the body, the posture, like we might look like we're 10 feet tall and we might look like we've got this radiant being because we're in that moment. So from even a yoga perspective, it's like we get to that moment in class where we're doing the posture we were building up to. And then we say, whoa, we made it. And then we come back and we say, okay, we're going to relax now or through the meditation because we deserve it, right? We got to celebrate and enjoy that we can do that. But also now, what came up by going through that process? And then how do we feel now that we've got this capability within, whether it be through yoga, the actual asana, or through the meditation, or through a Dharma talk, right? Where we talk about things that are related. And then does that continue to bring joy and energy into the body? Because when we think about energy and we're regulating with other people, our nervous system, and our nervous system is pretty darn important. There's so many nerves throughout the body, and that's what's sending signals to the mind from the heart, right? And other places, but that's what's sending signals to the body and why it's important to be healthy and keep moving, because then those that nervous system will activate and be more active. When we're in the calm state, we're not in that fight, flight, faint, or fawn. And when we're not in that, we're processing a little bit easier in the brain. We're in the respond, like we were talking about. When we're in the fight, flight, flame, fawn, a little tangent here, we're not always processing and we're reliving or experiencing things from previous, right? Because they might be stuck in the body or they might be traumatic and have a deeper groove of neurons in the brain. But that's how some of that stuff comes up. When we process it and release it, those things release. So coming back to our responding rather than reacting, we're able to feel more fully ourselves. And then that purpose becomes so much more easy too. So just going more into what you were talking about, even with your clients, right? They probably feel, you might have to ask them, but they probably will feel some of that too, where like things just work. The body isn't fighting some cold. They might be getting sick less frequently. They might be digesting their food better. They might not have to have that coffee in the morning and still feel like $1,000,000 first thing when they get up in the morning. When we're in that state, that's part of what it is because that natural energy is full, standing in their power, as you mentioned.
What what's it been like for you working with your clients in the yoga space that you've been in? What are some big transformations you've seen and helping people walk that path?
Oh, that's a great question. So it has varied. You know, there's the individuals who come in and sometimes they're like nervous at their first class. And they're like, oh, I don't know if I can do that, or I don't know if I can do this. But then once you get them into it and they start moving, they're like, oh, I want more because it feels good, right? When we
Mm.
process and we release the old, it feels good. We want the new to come in and we want those experiences. There's a challenge sometimes when we think about, oh, can I do handstand or can I do headstand as a beginner? Because it is a beginner pose. And at least what I teach, it might not seem like it would be a beginner pose, but it's possible for a lot of people to do it. We do use props and modifications, especially to build that confidence. But then when somebody gets through it, it's like a big change in their mindset. There's the folks that come periodically, right? They're like, I want to stretch, I want to move, but it's not necessarily that yoga isn't my thing all the time. Or sometimes they just want their own space. So they might practice at home, but they're going to come to class and learn some poses. That's a whole different experience. But we've got to work with that as introverts and extroverts. And where does the energy come from? Where is our purpose in that? Then there's folks too that are like, come to every single class. You know, they come to one and they're like, what's this yoga thing? And then they're coming to every single class. They're like changing their diet by, not necessarily having somebody say, you should eat this or that, right? They're saying, oh, that doesn't taste good anymore because it's not something they crave when their body's operating differently. And they might be journaling or releasing old things. Maybe they change other habits along the way and they exercise more frequently outside of class. And that's really cool too, because then we actually start getting into that digest part of Ayurveda and we're saying, hey, how can I get my body to be as efficient yet effective from the experiences I've had and where I'm headed to be prepared and live longer. And that's kind of cool too, because you see people process different emotions. Um, I have a couple of students, they came the first time, they've been coming ever since, and I'm teaching quite a few classes these days. But they started coming to every single one, and then they added on another teacher. So they're going, almost as many times a week as I'm teaching, which I think is pretty amazing, right? And there's some students that, they'll come, you'll see the crying at the end of practice
Mm.
and the end of meditation. And that's a whole different experience because when we release and when those emotions come up, it's it's not necessarily like we're, shouting from the rooftop what's happening in yoga class, right? Sometimes I joke about, what happens in yoga class is like what happens in Vegas, it stays there. But at the same time, um, part of it does, right? We're a community, we honor and respect the other people. And I'll either, check in and say, hey, are you okay? Or, help let them process if they want to open up. But it all depends because things like past traumas related to past relationships have come up before, like, oh, I haven't thought about this in a long time for what happened with me with this X person in my life, or hey, I'm really struggling with this at work and it's super stressful, or I'm struggling with this in my family and I want to make this change, or my body feels not the same as it did 20 years ago. And I don't know what do I do? Right? So all of those things came up. And that's actually how I went from teaching yoga, asana, and meditation, breath work into Ayurveda, because I wasn't sure how to respond in some of those
Mm.
situations to say, okay, how do I help you? Like, I can tell you to do these different yoga poses, but I'm not sure what to do in other situations. So when I went into the Ayurvedic counseling, I was like, okay, now I get it even more. How the body's connected from the skin all the way into the reproductive system and how they all work together. It's easier to say, okay, if you have a pain here, I might recommend a certain yoga pose or breath work. But it's different than when I say, oh, we might need to change up and maybe eat some more pineapple, or take this herb or think about taking this herb and see if it helps. We do go small, so we test it out first because everybody's body is different. That's the other part about Ayurveda, right? My experiences are different than your experiences, different than other people's experiences. And so we're going to process differently. We also started with different foods when we were younger, which creates the bacteria in the body and on the body. And so we're going to digest our
Mm.
food differently. I can teach a class at 5 in the morning, and I can teach a number of classes throughout the day, and then teach at 6:30, do the same posture and feel differently, as an example. It's the same idea of like, I can eat a banana today and I can eat one tomorrow, and it might taste a whole lot differently just based on some of the bacteria and other things going on. There's there's a lot of really, really cool stuff in the body and how it works, including that energy from the heart and how we keep that part flowing and free, as well as, if you haven't heard the phrase, the second brain is our gut. That's another part
Mm.
too. If we're eating a lot of sugar, we might have different thoughts than if we're eating balanced protein and natural, real food.
That's
I think I went on a
powerful.
long, yeah, I went on a long range. Sorry.
No, what you said was very powerful and very good. I was very captivated while you were talking. I was trying to keep track of everything, so I had some questions on that. When you do have that person break down in yoga, some people do cry and get that emotional release. I'm curious because of how you talk about yoga and Ayurveda, do they have feelings of like embarrassed, like why am I acting this way in this yoga class, or do they show a full out like this was a release, I needed this, like thank you for this. I'm curious what their reaction is when they experience that with you, because that's a very profound moment to be that open and to release all that pent up emotion.
It varies. So if it is someone that's been coming pretty routinely, then maybe they're like, okay, I'm just gonna take this, I'm gonna sit with it, let it process. If it's someone that's kind of new, and I remember the first time I cried after one of my yoga classes, we were in meditation and I like, it just wasn't gonna not, the tears weren't gonna not come up. And there were just a lot of thoughts coming up. And then by the end of the meditation, I was like, I gotta get out of here, right? Because we all process our emotions differently. So I was like, and I knew some other people in the room, and I was like, okay, part of my process was like, I want to cry more, but I wanted to feel safe in this space too. Um, so there were other people I knew, and I was like, hey, see ya. So I could feel safe in where I was at because it was new to me to have that full experience. Of course, when I've been sad, I've gone to the mat before that to help get my mind out of it, because part of it is the rhythm and the pattern that gets our mind and our body to release. But and later I followed up and said, hey, I'm sorry I had to leave class. Like, I had these things come up. I wanted to process them quietly and in a safe space. But, if you want to talk about it, I'm open. And the other people were like, okay, yeah, no big deal. We just taught you out other stuff to go do. Don't worry. But it does depend on the person and where they're at and their journey and their experience. And that's where, as the person in the front of the room holding space, guiding along the way, we can observe the body language. We can check in and say, hey, it's okay. I'm here. What do you need? Do you want to talk about it? Do you not want to talk about it? Are you embarrassed? And if you are, like, try to make contact with them that's not distracting to the whole class and like drawing everyone in and saying so and so is crying in the back, that's not a good response. But doing that in a way that makes them feel comfortable and then they can decide, right? I've had some students that were like, okay, Emily noticed and it's okay. And I'm willing to share that beyond just with Emily. So I'll share with the class what's going on. And the community that comes together from that is really, really cool because then people start to feel open about what they want to talk about and what's going on in their lives. That question or that idea of we say, hi, how are you? And we keep going rather than listening versus, hey, how are you? And then hearing what they're saying or taking a moment to pause and actually respond with something beyond good, bad, not good, maybe make it funny so people are actually like, oh, whatever it is, but it starts to bring that in and build some of that upon the community so that the people get to know each other too. And that's the bigger part of the yoking with the yoga as well. I will share, I have had, I know this isn't necessarily grief and a sad aspect, but I have had people come up because some of the meditations we do will bring back good memories and we start to relive some of that. And so I have had people come, out of that crying, but they're happy, you know?
Mm.
They're like, oh, this was a good memory to have come up today, and I so needed it. So it does vary in all of those experiences.
I'm glad you elaborated on that. And something you hit on really big there a few seconds ago is there's always this old school phrase that's been around since I was a kid, that we listen to respond, but we don't listen to hear. And that's something definitely in the grief space I think that is a big challenge with a lot of people is we're quick to relate a story we have or share how to get through something, or our mind is always going somewhere, so we're always like, go quick, and we're always like listening to talk over somebody instead of holding space for people. And I think what you shared in your yoga class is what I heard from you a lot is you do hold space for people very, very well. And you say, yes, they're showing outwardly some emotion they're processing. And we don't know what it is sometimes because we're just seeing the outside of it. But giving that person space or asking them a supportive question and making that room and environment feel safe opens up that door, kind of like what we were talking about earlier, too, that given an opportunity for those other people in the room to say, wow, this person's having an experience. And not in that way of like, oh, why are they crying or what are they upset about? But in this place of curiosity of, oh, wow, they're processing emotion right now. Oh, they held in something for 5 or 10 years and wow, they're working through that. I mean, that's impressive. Like it kind of gives them a safe sense for that person that is going through that emotional response to outwardly show and demonstrate to other people how to do that same thing and to encourage and give confidence to other people in that room that may be holding in the same thing and going, well, I just don't know how to process that, or I don't really want to feel that, or feeling awkward or uncomfortable to be like, wow, if they can do that, I can do that. I've got feelings like that too, and I've never really taken a chance to process that. Maybe this is a safe space for me to do so. It sounds like you create a wonderful environment for that in your yoga classes.
Thanks. I don't know if I've ever thought about it. I mean, of course I'm doing it consciously, but I haven't heard that come back to me. So I've kind of processed that at the moment, Chris. Um, yeah, part of the purpose to be on the mat, right? And truly be there for people when we care about each other, that comes out. And I think there's probably been times where we think about loneliness or being alone, and that can feel sad in its own way. Um, So being able to do that or have other people to do that, we've had somebody who's come in and they had an injury or something like that. And so it made it difficult to go back to work or to, take care of their normal routine. And so we all jumped in and pitched in with either food or carpooling or doing different things to help out with that. And that's what's really cool because that's what sustains the long-term capability, right? Our relationships and being with others helps us live longer, helps the heart feel happier, if you want to call it that, or more peaceful, and also connects to the heart a little bit more. Makes people feel seen and heard so they don't have to struggle in their own space or feel like there isn't goodness in life because there's so much goodness in life. Um, and side note, yes, I will process that a little bit more.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because my life honestly has been I've been around the wrong people in life a lot, majority of my life. It wasn't until really going after losing my son that I started getting good people to come in my life. And I can say, in today's world of things, there is a lot of negativity. There's a lot of hard stuff out there. People are very, like I talked about, urgency culture. Everybody's living in high fast reaction. They're not living and responding, and so it's very hard sometimes to find people that can hold space or be supportive of you or give you that comfort, like you do in your yoga sessions, that it's okay for me to break down and cry. I'm dealing with 5 or 10 years of crap I never dealt with, and now I have a safe space here to actually do this. And just that energy you can give to people when you find the right environment, find the right space. That can be the difference in people that go through grief, because grief is very isolating. Because I talked a lot about in my coaching that you're just around the wrong people. I had people that come to me and say, I don't really talk about this because my family's not supportive, or people I'm around as friends don't really want to talk about it, or it's uncomfortable for them, so they just change the subject or don't want to talk about it, or we don't see each other. There's all that stuff that happens that I'll call negative, for lack of a better term, that happens. But when you find the right people that can hold space for you without judgment, without any kind of fear, without needing to react over responding to you, it makes you feel safe. It makes you feel grounded. It makes you feel centered. And the thing that I've shared too with people is that you're not broken. You don't need to be fixed. There's not a problem with you. We all experience, we're souls having a human experience. And so there is no right and wrong way to grieve. There's no right and wrong way for you to process that. You might be doing a yoga session with Emily, and 15 years of past trauma just comes flying out on the mat in tears or acknowledgement. And that's not something to feel awkward or embarrassed or ashamed about. That's something to honor and respect and listen to. Emily said a powerful phrase a few minutes ago about feeling seen and heard, understood. When you come to that place in your grief journey, and that can be through yoga, it can be through coaching stuff I've done. Doesn't matter what modality, but when you get to that place, there is no judgment and hard emotion, but what is there is existence. And just saying, I accept myself fully for all that I am. I accept my experiences as they are, no matter, I don't classify them right and wrong, but I honor my experiences, and I learned from this experience, or I contributed something good with it. And that's what I'll choose to focus on. And I think when we give ourselves those safe spaces like you've given, to just see those things and acknowledge them, that gives us the foundation to move forward in life and make great choices out of grief.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. That's the acceptance part, right? I can tie it into what you do. Yeah, because ultimately that's where we feel ourselves and we accept ourselves, which makes it so much easier to accept each other. We come to the mat wherever we're at, is kind of what I call it, and it doesn't matter. We all have those different things, but when we can just say, okay, this is it, this is where I'm at, then it allows the rest of it to just flow, right? And we can actually have that human experience without as much pain and feel spirit flowing through us, which is a whole lot more energy and stronger energy than when we're, blocking that part of the body or part of the experience, I should say, and really connecting to I accept you as you are and you accept me as I am. And that's part of love. It really is.
And
Because then we can tie into even beyond. Yeah.
no, that's a beautiful way you said that because, in today's world, we all have these labels of things, and I'm becoming less and less a fan of labels because I've met people from just in my podcast. I just found out last night I'm on episode 54, and I've only been doing this less than 2 months. And I started thinking about all the people I've interviewed, and I've said, I've met everybody from all walks of life, from Emily that does yoga to another guy that's an actor to another guy that, used to work a corporate job and he quit after losing somebody and he's on to being his own coach and speaker and writing a book. And I've seen these people from an array of backgrounds and I don't see labels. I don't see them. But what I do see is there's a person that went through whatever grief journey it was in life, and some of them were not easy. They were not funny. They were awful. But I saw somebody rise from the ashes like a phoenix and saw all the good they put in the world. And it's to celebrate all of our unique differences. I was talking to a guy yesterday from Australia that he moved around a lot. So he was a very detached person growing up and he craved comfort, he craved certainty. And he talked about how he found it in his life. And he talked a lot about being ashamed of certain aspects of his life because he never had a place to call home. He was always moving all the time because of his family dynamic. And he was immersed in different cultures and different things. And I said, dude, I've lived in the same place for 33 years. I said, the story you just shared, I would have loved to have that experience. And so I said, some people may have criticized you on your path for whatever reason because they didn't want to be open to seeing the world from your view and your experience. And I said, I've been made fun of in my life for the opposite thing, where I'm so open to anybody. I don't care what your label is, what you identify with. I just see you as a person having an experience, and I level it down to that because in that place is where acceptance lives and breathes, and that space, open-mindedness lives in that space. Growth and contribution, love, as you talked about earlier, it all lives there. And I thought about, when we say that I'm a person and you're a person, and we're walking this journey together of life, we may have done it two totally different ways, but we're walking the journey of life together. And when we bring our shared experience together collectively, we have that place of learning, growth, and contribution. And that's just the beauty of life when we get there. Like,
Yeah. No, that's amazing. Because something that might not feel good to us when we process it and we recognize that love that's in the grief or the experience of what we have, it can transform in our minds or in our perspective on it into what is actually a super unique experience. It can be tough to move around, and it can also be tough in my perspective to be in the same place, right? Like, I've had a conversation about could you eat the same thing every day for every single meal and for a year, and think about it for a year, but, maybe
hmm,
expand that to think about it for your lifetime. And then think about all the things that you have eaten or that you could eat in that time frame. And like, what sounds more appealing? To me, it might be one way, but to you, it might be another way. But when we can look at either of those experiences as an experiment to learn more about ourselves and to learn more about each other, or say, okay, this is an opportunity to do something a little bit different. I don't know exactly what I think about it, but we're going to try it out. And then we'll know if we like it or we don't like it, right? And we can say,
yeah.
oh, I want to change this. Yeah, PB&J every day for every single meal isn't going to work for me. Like I need something else with it or whatever it is. But I think when we can have that mindset, that open-mindedness that you mentioned, but also just that like open to what's coming in a way that we still get to decide, right? If it's something we know we'd prefer different, we've got to be honest with ourselves and with others for that. But, you know, that openness allows us to have the experience and just see it as such and not hold on to some of what can feel like something holding you back or a grief or an issue in the tissue, depending on what it is. Um, I had an eye-opening moment a couple of weeks ago. I was reading something about the number of women who've run for president. And looking
Mm.
back, there's actually a lot of women. And I was surprised. Even in the early um sorry, I lost my train of thought for a moment. I got excited, apparently. But, women have
That's
only been
okay.
able to women have only been able to vote for a little over 100 years. And, you know, that's how things have been, whether that's good or bad is open to interpretation by each individual. But the lady that first ran for president was nominated to run for president. It was an independent party. It wasn't Democratic or Republican. It's actually before women were able to vote. And the funny part about it is I guess she was younger than 35, which per the Constitution, right? That's not technically in line with what the Constitution says, but she ran anyways, right? And I was like, okay, whoa. So we've had 40 some women run in all these years. And
Whoa.
this one lady, they did, some of them made it through the primary, some of them didn't, if you go back and look. But this one lady decided she could run before she was 35. And it didn't matter to her. It was important. It was something she wanted to do and she decided to do. And so for me, I was like, okay, that's really, really cool. When we can think about that and say, okay, here's these experiences. What do I want to do? What would I love and truly enjoy for this potential future ahead? Kind of empowering to think about, no matter whether you're male or female or, other things come up, right? But um, it was an interesting, eye-opening moment to think about along kind of what we're talking about for just being who we are.
I love that you shared that story because there's so many people in life that I mean I consider for hours. So I'm a huge history nut. But there's so many people in our world that have stepped outside the box and have just said, "This is who I am. This is who I want to be, and this is my mission. I'm going after, and I don't care who stops me." And I know there's a lot of heat in the world right now, but a lot of the things that we have as cars and cell phones and TVs and even something simple as a yoga mat, by the way, even something as simple as that. Somebody created it, somebody stepped out and made it, somebody showed other people how to use it. And so had that person not stepped up, like you said with this woman that ran for president and said, I don't care what the Constitution says, this is me, I'm doing it. Had they not had that mindset to just say, this is who I am and step in my power and run, who knows how that would have changed things? Who knows what opportunities might have been missed by that? So I think that was just a powerful example of what I also share with people in grief. Is the same thing. I say, if there's something you put off for 20 years, go do it. If it's something that you've always said, well, I maybe kind of shoulda, I don't know, go do it because you'll never know what you'll stumble across. And I'm a prime example of that. I never saw myself starting a podcast. If you asked me 3 months ago from today, hey Chris, would you start a podcast? I would have said, no, I would never do that. That's crazy. I don't even know how that works. That's what I honestly would have told people. I don't want to do it. I have no interest in that. But here I am 54 episodes in. I'm going, I love this. I get to meet people every day. So to your point of the story that you shared about the woman that ran for president, when you just step up and say, this is who I am and I accept myself fully, and this is what my passion, my desire, everything is, and you step in that alignment of yourself, you never know what good things are going to come out of that. And I will say it'll be more good than bad, I'll tell you that tenfold. Um, so I appreciate you sharing that story.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's awesome that you're doing the podcast and there's plenty of benefit from that. So it takes a lot to be able to say, okay, this is coming from spirit and it feels good. So let's try it and really accept that Okay, it's possible. And I'm gonna go do it. So it's a
But I
good
think,
part too of all of that.
well, when you let go of your fear with things, that's what I share with people in the grief space. When you let go of fear in whatever way you can, and I'm not saying you have to get over it. It's the complete opposite of what I'm saying, but take it in 1% steps is what I like to call it. 1%, just 1% knock on that fear door, 1% a day or 1% a week. You can break that door down, and you'll be amazed what happens on the other side of it. I was in a place where I never wanted to share my story less than 4 months ago. I didn't want to talk about losing my kids. It made people uncomfortable. I got an amazing response from strangers across the world I never even met before, other than once on a podcast. And I broke that fear barrier. Now I'm doing this thing. So I always want to encourage listeners, especially after what Emily shared today about this story, that I'm impressed by the way 40 women have ran for president. I had no idea. I actually want to go research that now because I'm actually really interested to hear the background of that. But to your point, Emily, like if we stay in line with ourselves, and sometimes spirit does talk to us. Spirit says, "Hey, you need to go over here. Forget this thing that happened." It's a redirection. I always say if a door closes, it's redirection, and doesn't mean there's something bad or wrong with you. It just means you're meant for something better. So take it.
Yeah, yeah, something more, something more. It would be really cool. I think it's close to 40, maybe a little more, but it's worth looking at. Yeah, it's on Wikipedia if you need it. Um, but
Awesome.
it's a great experience to be able to chat a little bit about the grief too and how it comes up in day-to-day experiences, let alone the bigger picture. So it's a pretty neat that you were willing to share that. The loss of a child is a really tough thing. So
It's definitely been a hard one, but it's something that I fill with gratitude every day because I get to talk to wonderful people such as yourself every day, and I get to learn all sorts of topics, all different fields of area, and different people's grief journeys and healing stories. And I've shared that my guests like you teach me things, and I'm actually healing because of people like you. And on top of that, people are listening to my podcast, and people are not only hearing my story a million times over, but they're hearing all my different guests come on the show and hearing how everybody deals with grief in a different way. Everybody has different healing modalities. And to the fact that you and I get to give back to complete strangers across the world who listen to this podcast and help them through their grief journey just shares how powerful it is that you and I, again, as we wrap up the podcast, you and I have walked two different things of life. We've got two different mindsets, beliefs, different grief stories, different experiences, but we're able to come together and help people on that journey. And that's why I think it's so powerful. So Emily, I want to first off say thank you so much for being on the podcast today. This has been an awesome episode. As I wrap up, I always ask my guests a couple questions. The first one is if you run into somebody dealing with grief or who's maybe stuck in grief, what are one or two things you would share with them that could help them navigate that journey just a little easier?
so take a deep breath. I mean, that's one of the easiest ways to switch the nervous system and calm down a little bit. Not necessarily that I'm like saying thou shalt, but offering, and saying, hey, I'm here with you. Because that's the other thing is you're not alone. There's someone else out there, no matter what it is, and we'll get through it.
I love that. Yeah, grief can be very isolating, but I encourage people to, like Emily said, there are people out there, whether that's through Facebook groups or community outreach that you can look at. Churches in particular do have grief counselors a lot. There may also be mental health or therapies places in your local area community that can offer resources to help as well. So you're never alone in today's world. There's so many ways to connect with people, and especially people that have gone through something that you may be experiencing right now, whether that's losing a grandparent, losing a child, or even for that matter, losing a job or relocating. Grief isn't always narrowed into death. There's lots of areas of life where grief happens, and it's important to honor those. Emily, if people want to connect with you, where can they find you?
You can find more information at www.embodymindyoga.com. That's M as in Mary, B as in boy, O, D as in dog, Y, N as in Nancy, M as in Mary, I, N as in Nancy, D as in dog, and yoga.com. And they
Oh,
can also find me on Instagram and Facebook too if they're looking for that.
awesome. Well, I will be able to put your links in the show notes. So for anybody listening to this podcast or watching this on YouTube, visit the show notes and I'll put Emily's links so you guys can get in contact with her. I do recommend connecting with her. She's a beautiful person who's out there changing lives in the yoga modality. And I just encourage everybody to connect with her. She's a beautiful person.
Thank you so much, Chris. That's an honor. I've truly enjoyed all of our conversations too. There's that consciousness connection I truly feel. So it's a beautiful thing.
Well, thank you. Well, I also want to thank all of our listeners for joining Emily and I today on this episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with somebody you know who could benefit from Emily's story. For more episodes that are designed to empower you and support you during your grief journey, visit empowergriefjourney.com and subscribe to this podcast. You can also find us on Apple and Spotify. The Empower Grief Journey is all about honoring your journey, embracing your emotions, and finding strength in your own time. You're never alone on this journey, and together we can navigate grief with courage and compassion. Until next time, be kind to yourself and take your grief journey one step at a time.